Okay, so counteroffers are super important because that's it's part of your negotiation. When you receive a counteroffer either from your seller, or I mean from a seller if you're helping a buyer, or if you're a seller's agent, when you send a counteroffer. Now in my car forms or win forms, I actually keep a I have a template of a counteroffer. And the reason I do is because it's pretty standard and it helps me because I don't know about you guys, but how many times do things get missed? Do we, forget to put stuff, in the counter? So I'm just going to show you guys what my counter looks like. And I usually include it on an addendum. That's me, but you don't have to do it that way. So basically, here is when I'm a listing agent, this is a standard counter that I use just because these are things that I want to make sure that I cover. Because like especially right now, when you guys are doing multiple counters, it can get confusing because certain agents mark certain boxes and other agents don't. So this just reminds me of the things to look through. So for instance, I always ask for the earnest money deposit to be deposited within 48 hours. On the contract, it's 72 hours. But I like to receive it sooner than later because obviously once it's accepted, the clock starts ticking. So we want to make sure that we have a solid buyer who is definitely moving forward with the purchase. I always spell out who the escrow, who the title is, the natural hazard report. And the reason why is because I've already ordered the prelim. I've already ordered the natural hazard report. I've done all of that, research up front. So I'm just letting them know who it is that I'm going to be working with. And then home warranty, depending on what it is, I will usually give a standard policy. So it just depends on what it is that they ask for. And maybe the offer is how I'll determine if we're going to pay. Let's say they ask for 700, depending upon, what the offer looks like. It's possible we could change it. Close of escrow, the reason why I have that on there, I don't always do 30 days, but I have that on there just as a reference to make sure that I look at the close of escrow on the offer to make sure that it lines up with what it is that I'm doing for the other party. And then I always include all appliances and personal property that are in the home. They're not worth anything and there's no warranty on them. So like, for instance, if you notice, sometimes buyers will ask for, I want the swing set, or I want, the refrigerator or washer and dryer or what have you. So whenever they ask for certain things, then at that point I will write that so that way they understand that there's no value given to those items, nor is there any warranty on those items either. And then possession shall be close of escrow. So again, I put that on there just to remind myself to make sure that I am negotiating enough time for that particular seller. So it could be maybe it's contingent, that they have to sell to buy. So there could be a time frame where they maybe need to rent back, or maybe they need 5 days, 7 days, 10 days, whatever it is, to move out of their home once it's closed. So that's super important to make sure you negotiate that up front. You always want to negotiate as much as possible up front, because at that point everybody's willing to will and deal. Once you're in escrow, things start changing really quick. So you want to make sure that you get all of that situated in the beginning. Buyers to get cross-qualified with seller's preferred lender. That's something I do every single time. I always require a cross-qualification because we want to make sure that the buyer is in fact qualified. Now, when a buyer sends you a DU approval, a pre-approval letter, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're approved, because just so you know, the DUs can be manipulated. Whoever inputs the information, if they didn't input it accurately, it can have an effect on what the true outcome is. And I'll give you an example. Let's just say, for instance, you have a construction worker who works for the union. And right now, they're on the job site making all this overtime and, making $35 an hour, let's just say. You might have one loan officer who's going to give them their full-time hours and the overtime. So in the DU, they're going to put the income as, let's just say $10,000 a month based off, what their current, what it currently is. You might have another loan officer who says, you know what, you're a union worker and your income changes depending upon the job you're at and you're not consistent. So, because what happens is once a job ends, sometimes they don't work for a certain period of time and then they go into working. So let's just say the next person is more conservative and says, I'm going to give you $7,500 a month of income because I'm going to average you. So again, depending upon the bank they're sending it to, depending upon the program, there's a lot of factors involved. So what happens with the cross qualification is the lender will actually be able to go in there and decide and take a look and say, what happened? The lender would be able to decide and say, hey, you know what, you're using too much income. They don't qualify. Or they can say, hey, Elliot, you know what, I wouldn't take this buyer because of X reason. They don't have enough funds, or they're relying on something to happen to make this happen. Are you okay with that? So the nice thing about that is you're going to have them talk to the lender that you trust to be sure that, they are in a position, to close the deal. So again, there's nothing wrong with doing that. Don't feel, bad, because there are some agents that frown upon it and say, oh, I can't, my lender's great and, blah, blah, blah. And that's great. I'm glad your lender's great, but we have a duty to our seller and we have to confirm that. Okay. So there's that. Items 7B2I and II to be removed from the contract. So I always keep that in there. Not every agent checks that on an offer, but there are agents who do check that. So that's something that I always want to exclude from any offer that's received by me. I don't even include that in my offers that I send to sellers or to, listing agents. The purpose of that clause basically states that the seller is willing to do, and there's no cap on it. So the seller's willing to do any required repairs with no cap. So anything that the city or county, anything that maybe needs to be up to code, because let's say you're selling a home that was built in 1980, and now all of a sudden you're going to see, right, home inspectors are going and saying, well, it's code now that you need a pan underneath your water heater, or you need that pipe running down. It wasn't code then. So by you clicking that is making the seller responsible for any, codes that have, changed since their home was rebuilt or remodeled or what have you. So you always want to have that removed, because let the buyer ask for it and the seller agree to it, opposed to you agreeing blindly of, what those repairs would be. So that's just a little nutshell explanation. Make sure that you always counter that out if you're a listing agent, to protect your sellers from having to pay any fees that they're not aware of, when they sign that contract. And then obviously inspection contingencies, you want them to remove their contingencies as fast as possible. People can do a home inspection in the first 3 to 5 days. And then obviously, it maybe something comes up and they need an additional inspection. So I believe 10 days is sufficient if the agent's on it. There's no reason why they can't get, the inspection done, within the first, 10 days to verify everything's good to go. And if you are a listing agent, make sure you're signing your listing documents, all your disclosures, when you take that listing. If Jessica's your TC, make sure that you let her know, I'm meeting with these people tomorrow. I'm going to explain the documents to them, e-sign them, send them to DocuSign for them to complete, or have them printed for me. I want to sit with them and have them signed. Right now, homes are selling so fast that you want to know if there's any issues up front. That way you don't get into escrow. I don't know how many of you guys have ever gotten into escrow and nowhere did it say someone had just passed in the property, and then all of a sudden you're 10, 15 days in, and on your disclosures, it says, there was a death on the property. So how do your clients feel about that now that they've invested, time and money? So you want to definitely make sure that you're disclosing everything up front, because you rather, go in knowing everything than not. It's important to do that. So that's just kind of what I do. Again, I take a look at every offer that I receive and I dissect it. I go through it and see what it is that I want to counter. But these are the main things that I focus on. Obviously, price too, and then you can add your contingency if you are a seller. Helping a seller and they have a home that it's contingent upon them selling. Make sure you write that in there. And not only that, but if there's another contingency, you can write it in here as well. So like, let's just say, for instance, you have a seller who says, you know what, I want to sell. I don't have to buy another home, but if my husband doesn't get that promotion in 2 months or in 3 weeks or whatever it's supposed to be, then we're not going to leave, because that's the only reason we're leaving is because of X. So if there's a main reason why they are leaving, but it's not to do with the sale of a home, you can add it to your counter as well. And you can say, you know what, this home is contingent upon my client, receiving, that promotion in, Pomona or whatever, or wherever it is, and they will know by X date. So that way the buyers are aware that if that doesn't happen, then the seller has the right to cancel. So just make sure that, everybody is aware of what is happening and they're agreed upon it, because I have had in the past where it wasn't disclosed. One of the agents here in our office had a listing and she did not disclose it. And then the seller came and said, hey, remember I told you that if this came back this way, I wasn't going to sell. And you told me I could get out of my contract. Well, she could not get out of her contract because nowhere was it disclosed. Thankfully, she was able to talk to the buyer's agent and give them the explanation as to what was taking place. And they agreed to cancel, but they didn't have to. So that's why you don't want to go there. You want to make sure that you're disclosing everything up front, especially right now. People are open to anything right now. So I think just full disclosure is super important. So that way you don't have, any issues at all. So there are different counter offers. So you have a seller counter offer, right? So you have seller counter offer number one. Now, this is not a multiple counter offer. A seller counter offer can be used even if you have multiple offers, but you only want to counter one person, you can counter that one person. And let me tell you the best times to use this. So let's just say you have a listing and you get a really strong offer, but you want to counter that one person only. Because when you do a multiple counter and you have a great offer, you might discourage that buyer. They might feel like, well, I'm not, I still might not have a chance. So what I typically do is I will use a seller counter offer to counter that person only on certain details. And down here, if you notice where the expiration is, I'll give them 24 hours to respond. That way, I still have my other offers that I haven't responded to just yet, but at least I'm not wasting a lot of time waiting for this person to decide if they're going to move forward or not. But that's typically a way to use just a counter offer. So you can use it even if you have multiple counters or multiple offers, you can use it and just counter one person. And then again, just shorten your expiration date. Even if you shorten it to 5 hours, 6 hours, talk to the agent and let them know I have multiple offers. But if your buyer is serious and they can do X, Y, and Z, then have them sign it by the end of the day and then the deal's done. If they don't, then obviously it expires and then now you can go on about negotiating. So that's a good way to do it. If you have multiple offers, then obviously you can send a multiple counter offer based on that. You can use the multiple counter offer is it looks like this. And so you just have to remember that, you're sending it to multiple agents to see, whoever's going to come back. So what happens with the multiple counter offer is even though you're sending it out like a seller counteroffer, if they execute it, you're in a binding agreement. You know, that's it. There's no more, the seller doesn't have to approve it. Whereas the seller multiple counteroffer, you're sending it to multiple people. By them receiving a multiple counteroffer, they understand that there's multiple people receiving the same or different. The terms don't have to be the same. You know, it doesn't matter what the terms are, but they understand that they're in a competition still with other offers. It is until the bottom, section 8, where it says selection of accepted multiple counteroffer. Once that's executed, at that point, it's that counteroffer that would be binding and in full effect. So, but you cannot send a multiple counteroffer if you only have one offer. I know a lot of agents do that because they want to leave it open in case another offer comes in that's better, but you're not supposed to do that. You can get in trouble. So that's why I tell people, if you want to do that, then make sure that you shorten the seller counteroffer so that way they don't hold you up for 3-4 days or whatever to decide if they want your home or not. And now you get another offer in and you're kind of waiting. So always make sure that you shorten up that time if you're dealing with one person. That way you can see how motivated they are to open escrow. If they're delaying or they're not in a hurry, then that means they're waiting on something else. There's something else out there. You know that if they're focused on your home, they really want your home, they're going to jump on it and go through hoops to get it signed within hours, within an hour's time. You see what I mean? Because they want to get that offer accepted. So, a lot of times people ask what can be put on a counteroffer and what can't be. I'm sorry, didn't need to do that. Put on a counteroffer. So down payment and loan amount adjustments are automatic under paragraph 1B of the counter. So you don't have to counter that. So like, let's just say, for instance, you have where you put the loan amount is going to be 500,000, but now your lender's saying, no, it's going to be 450. You don't have to put that in the counteroffer because it already says in the RPA that it can be adjusted. It can be revised. That's not a big deal. So that's not something a seller has to approve, basically, because a counteroffer is a negotiation. That is something that the seller has to agree to. So just keep that in mind. Now, deposit is not automatically adjusted. So if you want your buyer to come in with more deposit, then obviously you're going to counter. So for instance, if the buyer's agent has a $5,000 deposit on the RPA, but your seller's like, no, I want 10,000. Then you need to counter the amount. So that way, the right amount is inputted on the RPA. Another big one is the liquidated damages and arbitration. So basically on that page of the RPA, if one party signs and the other party doesn't sign, because it does happen sometimes, especially when you're sending the offer through DocuSign, they think they can opt out. They don't understand, so they'll skip it. If you get an offer like that and your seller does want arbitration, you need to make sure that you put that in your counter, that arbitration is, to be made part of this, this contract, or liquidated damages, is, part of this contract. And you can also require the buyer to initial the RPA, so that way it's now binding. So always keep an eye out on those things. Those things are important as well. And to withdraw a counteroffer. So legally, all that is necessary to withdraw a counteroffer is to communicate it as withdrawn. Okay, this can be done verbally, but it's better to do it in writing with withdrawal of offer. So there's a CAR form WOO. You just want to simply let them know that, your client is no longer, submitting the offer. So you can do that to withdraw the offer. Now, like I was mentioning, in order to create a binding agreement, it's created when the final counter offer is accepted and returned to and personally received by the buyer or seller who made the counter offer. So If paragraph 2 on the SCO or BCO is completed with the name of the agent, then returning it to that agent may create a binding agreement as well. So if these paragraphs are left blank, however then accepted, the counteroffer must be personally received by the buyer or seller who made it. So you always want to make sure that you input your name into the area right here. If you see this where it says 6 acceptance, and then it says on the date, and then it'll tell you by who, received is personally received by buyer or, and then that would be your name, because you want to make sure that you input your name on there, that you can receive the acceptance on their behalf. Otherwise, it's not accepted until it's sent to them. So either way, I mean, they're going to receive it. But does anyone have any questions so far? No? Everybody's like, no questions. Okay, let's see. Let's go on the chat. Okay, so remember, you can counter anything, pretty much, any term, anything at all, but it has to be in obviously in the counter. Now, the other thing is I've had agents call me and they say, oh, I don't want to counter. I just want to do an addendum because when an addendum is something that once the offer is accepted, that's when you do an addendum. So you have to understand that, because once you're in escrow, you're not going to do another counter. Like, let's just say you change price. You don't do a counter. You do an addendum. That's when the addendums are used to change anything while you're in escrow. But what happens is I've seen where the buyer's agent will say, I agree to the counter, but I do want to change one thing. So I'm just going to put it in an addendum. So that way it's not something that the seller has to agree upon. So just depending on what it is, you can do it that way. I have seen things done that way, just because they want to get the offer accepted already. Okay. Can you guys hear me? Oh, how weird. It said I've been signed out of my account. And I'm like, hello? I don't know what happened. Hold on real quick. Hold on.
We can hear you good.
Is my screen sharing or no?
Yes, it is.
Yes.
I can still see the zip form.
That is super, super weird. Okay. It's telling me my screen sharing is paused. It's telling me, yeah, weird. But anyhow, yeah, it's not on here. Okay, here we go. So weird. Okay. So then now that's if you're on the seller. So now if you're on the buyer side, obviously, let's just say your client, received this. How many times have you gotten, a seller multiple counteroffer and it says highest and best when you get that, right? And then they spell out all the other terms, highest and best. This is who our escrow is. This is who our title is. This is what this is this, this is this. Now, if your client has given their final offer and they don't want to change anything, then you just have to sign the multiple counteroffer and send it back. You don't have to do another buyer's counteroffer and say anything, because nothing's changing. So unless there's something that you don't agree on the seller multiple counteroffer, but if you agree, but they don't want to go higher, they don't want to change their offer, then you're just going to sign the seller multiple counteroffer, and then you're going to email it to the agent and let them know my client stands firm with their original offer. And here's, the signed counter acknowledging, the other, changes that you made or whatever. So that's how that's done. If the buyer decides that they want to increase their offer, or they want to shorten contingencies or remove a contingency or what have you, then at that point, you are going to go down here and you are going to write under number 7, subject to the attached counter offer. And then here's, you're going to write the number. So it would be, buyer BCO 1, buyer counter offer 1. And then you're going to attach the buyer counteroffer and only put the things that you're changing. You don't need to reiterate anything that's already on a previous, like let's say your deposit on your offer was 25,000. You don't need to put it on the buyer, the buyer counteroffer, deposit to be 25,000 because that's already been placed, in the original offer. So on there, you're just going to write the things that, you're changing. So maybe you're going to adjust your sales price. Maybe you're willing to pay out of above appraisal now, maybe you're willing to do something different. So then whatever you're trying to do to make that offer a little bit better, that's where you're going to input that. Okay. And that's typically what the counter offers, like I said, are used for. It's to me, it's pretty black and white, but I think it's important, like I said, for you guys to create those templates so that way, because it's so easy to miss stuff. I can't tell you how many times, before doing the template, it's like, oh shoot, I forgot to negotiate them more time to move out, and you're like, oh, so having the template is just a guide to remind you that, to go over, these are the important things in an offer that you should be reviewing to make sure that you're covering, or you've had that conversation with your seller, where's their next move? Where are they going? What's going to happen at that point, just so that way, but always negotiate. Like I said, everything up front, super important. So that way, throughout the transaction, you're trying to make it as smooth as possible. Even when you're doing, rent backs and stuff like that, you want to make sure that, you negotiate that as much as possible up front. I know sometimes you don't know because maybe it is contingent upon them buying something else. So you don't know if they're going to have a house right away or if it's going to take longer. But just try to put something in place to protect your seller or your buyer, depending upon who you're representing. But put something in place so that way it's easier to negotiate after. Because when you don't have anything in place, and I'll give you an example, like I said, because I helped a lot of different agents and they come to me after the fact and they're like, Sonia, we're about to close escrow and my client needs, X amount of time, or now the seller wants to stay in the property and now my client's worried. And so, like I said, all of that should be negotiated up front. So that way everybody's at ease and you're not worried about it. And even anything in the home, like as an agent, you should be walking around with your client. Right now, people have cameras, they have, the Ring doorbells, all of the Nest, what is it? The air conditioner thingies. What are they called? I can't even think. Katie, help me. What is it called?
Thermostat.
Yeah, there you go. The thermostat. So like there's so many different things, in these homes nowadays. So and your buyer's walking through assuming that they're included. So you need to make sure that you are, and what I usually do, if I see that, I'll try to take pictures because again, I forget. So that's what your Avid is for, to make sure you see and you pay attention to what was there, so that way, if they're going to swap out a ceiling fan or they're going to swap out something, it's important for that to be understood because a buyer that's walking through that home is basing their price based off what they see. Now, if I'm telling them, oh, just so you know, the surround sound is not included, they're going to be taking, their bar that's attached, to the outside, they're going to remove that. They're taking that barbecue that's built in. You see what I'm saying? Like they know ahead of time. So it's like, okay, no big deal. But try telling your client that, in the middle of the transaction, they're going to be upset. So again, all those things are super important. Include those on the counter offers, or included in your offer, that they are to be included in the sale of the property, because you will be surprised, that the listing agents don't always have that conversation with the seller. So they don't know and they start taking everything down. So, but anyhow, so just wanted to give you guys that, that information. If you guys need any help, once you get an offer, if you want to be, want us to go line by line and just to show you, how we would do the counter, I'd be happy to help you guys. Because again, that's one of the most important parts. You want to make sure that you guys are, have 100% agreement when you're going into escrow.
Thank you, Sonia.
Okay, so if you guys don't have any questions, then that concludes our class.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Is this gonna
Sonia.
stay recorded here?
Huh?
Are we gonna keep this recorded? Is it gonna be
Yes.
somewhere so I can go over?
Yes. Yes. Yeah, Jessica will upload it to the YouTube.
Oh, okay, good.
Okay. All right, you guys. Well, have a great afternoon, and thank you
Thank you
again
so
for
much.
joining.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye.
Okay. Bye-bye. Bye.